Wow, my forehead is looking very shiny right now. Hello, my friends. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Hazel Jane, and I like to paint crap on my face. Okay, so before we get started, I did miss uploading last week because the research for this particular video took a little bit longer than I thought it would, and I've got a big bunch of other little projects that I'm working on at the moment, so it all just got a bit much. I know I originally said I was going to be doing a video every week for December, but that has obviously not happened. So just for the time being, I am going to be doing these videos like every other week, just to give myself a little bit more time to do the really in-depth research and make sure that I know what I'm talking about. But I will first of all say thank you to everyone for your patience and understanding with me while I try and get my shit together. But we are not here to discuss how disorganised I am as a human being. No. We are back with another instalment of this lovely series where we get to dive into the weird and wonderful world of monsters and myths and legends. And each episode, I will be trying to bring these stories to life through a makeup look inspired by the creatures behind the legend. Now, we are into December, so we are doing some holiday-themed themes. And Today is one that has actually been requested a few times. I was going to do it anyway, so it's all married together quite nicely. But today we are going to be going over to Iceland to look at some of the Icelandic Christmas traditions and legends. Because, oh my god, they are wild. So grab a seat, grab a drink, and let's dive into the story. I look a bit like a bug. For those of you who are interested in the makeup side of things, I will link all of the products that I use in the description box down below. I will also apologise in advance for any and all names or places or just words in general that I mispronounce. I do try my best to get the pronunciations correct, but some of these words are really hard. And more often than not, I do get them wrong. So I'm sorry in advance. Please feel free to correct me in the comments when I do get them wrong. So, Christmas. The holiday season in general is meant to be a very fun, festive time, just however you choose or don't choose to celebrate it. The tales of Santa watching you throughout the year to make sure that you've been well behaved in order to receive presents. A very old, very classic Christmas holiday tradition. Now, the legend of Santa Claus and his list of naughty and nice children is a very good example of a cautionary tale used to convince children to behave themselves. If you were good, you would get presents, but if you weren't good, you would wake up on Christmas morning to find coal, or some variation of bad present. Why have I gone in with like the smallest brush? Now, cautionary tales of creatures and monsters especially that are used to scare children into behaving have existed for centuries, though generally over time they've been sort of adjusted and retold in a bit more of a child-friendly manner, because some of the original stories are horrifying. Like, just look at some of the original tales that like Disney films are based on. They are horrendous. Now, whilst Santa Claus or Father Christmas, St. Nicholas, whatever you want to call him, he is a figure from legend that originated in Western Christian culture, but many other countries have the kind of their own versions and iterations and folklore of this sort of character type. Again, a lot of which over time have just become associated with the Christian Christmas holiday. Again, very similar to how some of the traditions and practices from the pagan festival Samhain were adopted by Christians into what we now know as Halloween. Now, over in Iceland, rather than like one individual character or figure, Icelandic Christmas folklore depicts like a monstrous family that lives in the mountains who then come to town during the holidays. To the extent that Iceland is known for having like 26 days of Christmas or something like that. Like, I'll get into that bit later, but there is a whole family dynamic involved in this. Now, the stories of this family are indeed aimed at children as a way to get them to behave. And the folklore surrounding them, it kind of ranges from like just light-hearted, harmless, mischievous prankster types, all the way to these monsters who just straight up eat children who misbehave. Like, they got the whole range. This is looking a bit more like a face mask than I had intended it to. Now, the matriarch of this family is an ogress named Grýla, who she is the one who is known for taking disobedient children, kidnapping them, putting them into a really big pot, and then cooking them and eating them. She does have a husband whose name I will try and pronounce. He is Lepalu. But he is apparently just super lazy and doesn't really do anything. He just stays at home in their cave. But between these two, they have 13 sons known as the Yule Lads. Now, the Yule Lads are often depicted as these like big, giant, sort of like troll-esque creatures, and they are known as mischievous pranksters who will often steal or just generally harass the townspeople. And all 13 of them have very distinctive and descriptive names that kind of basically explain their favourite way of harassing people, which, again, I will get into that later because it's hilarious. The Yule Lads are known for visiting the town one by one in the last 13 nights before Yule or around Christmas. Like, the dates are a bit all over the place with it, but they leave small gifts for children who have placed their shoes on a windowsill if the child has behaved. However, if the child has been disobedient, they will instead leave a rotten potato in their shoe. Now, the final member of this big, monstrous, child-eating, cave-dwelling family is actually the family cat. But, of course, it's not just a normal, nice little cat. No, it is instead this huge, vicious, just monstrous cat that eats people. And this cat is known as the Yule Cat. Now, before I get too caught up in the folklore behind each of these family members, I wanted to have a little look at the difference between, like, Christmas and Yule in this case, because a lot of sources that I found kind of interchanged them and kind of just used a mix of both when describing this particular family. But obviously, the history of Christmas beyond the Christian holiday is really, really long and very confusing, and it often like blends into a lot of other cultures and celebrations. Again, think Halloween. But seeing as a majority of this family are referred to as the Yule something, I wanted to start there. So Yule is a winter festival that was historically observed by tribal groups who lived in Northern Europe during the sort of early Middle Ages. And these tribes are often referred to as the Germanic peoples. Now, it was during the Christianization of the Germanic peoples between sort of 700 and 1100 AD that England and what we now know as like northern France were officially declared Christian. And in Scandinavia, Germanic sort of paganism lost any political influence that they had to Christianity. And again, similar to the sort of absorption of certain Samhain traditions into the Christian holiday of Hallowmas or All Hallows Eve, whatever you want to refer to it as, certain aspects of the Yule festival were incorporated into Christmas as a way of helping with the conversion of the Germanic peoples to Christianity. Now, there are still many people who celebrate Yule sort of independently from Christmas and the Christian holiday, including those who follow what is known as modern Germanic paganism, although in some cases it is still referred to as heathenry. So there's a collection of tales or sagas from Iceland written in Old Norse known as Heimskringla, and within these sagas was something known as the Saga of Hakon the Good. I already feel like I'm butchering all of these names, I'm very sorry. But basically this saga in particular focuses on King Hakon I of Norway, who ruled from like 934 to 961. I don't know why it's so weird trying to say a year when it's only 3 numbers, but this particular king was noted and remembered for his attempts to bring Christianity to Norway. And the saga itself does credit him with the Christianization of the country, as well as the rescheduling of Yule to coincide with the Christian holidays at the time. The saga states that when Hakon arrived in Norway, he was a confirmed Christian, but because the country was still like majoritively heathen and still kept up with their like pagan practices and rituals, he kept his Christianity hidden in order to sort of try and gain favour with people, and in particular gain like the help and favour of the great chieftains of the country. Now, over time, as Hakon grew in popularity and also power, he had a law passed that established Yule celebrations were to take place at the same time as the Christians celebrated Christmas, and that everyone was to have ale for the celebrations with a measure of grain, or else pay fines, and had to keep the holiday while the ale lasted. Now in 2007, a translation of the Old Norse text was published, which included a description of the heathen Yule practices, which, according to this saga, were as follows. The ancient custom was that when sacrifices were to be made, the farmers would come down to the heathen temple, bringing with them any food that they would need while the feast lasted. During this feast, everyone had to partake in the drinking of ale, and there were many, many different sorts of livestock and animals that were killed in order to provide food for the feast. This actually included like horses as well, and all the blood from these animals was collected and then placed into like a special vessel, because the blood was referred to as sacrificial blood. And there was also something called the sacrificial twigs, which was basically what we now know to be, let me try and get this right, aspergillum? It's basically this like Christian liturgical instrument that is used to like sprinkle holy water, and it's actually sometimes referred to as a little sprinkler. I saw that a lot of like modern pagan practices still use this as well, particularly in like Wicca, in order to cleanse like ritual areas, though I believe they don't use holy water in that instance. But basically these sacrificial twigs were used to like sprinkle and smear this animal blood over like the pedestals of different idols and the walls of the temples, and also over all of the men who were in attendance at this feast. The meat from the animals that had been killed was then boiled and cooked and served as the food for this feast. Large fires were lit in like the middle of the temple floor, and like kettles were hung over them, and there was something that was referred to as the sacrificial beaker was blessed by the chieftain, and he would also place blessings over the meat and the food. A number of different toasts were then made with the compulsory ale, the first one being to Odin for victory and power to the king. The second toast were then to Njord and Frey for good harvests and peace, and the third toast was for the king himself to drink from the blessed sacrificial beaker. And then additional toasts followed that were drunk in memory of like departed kinsfolk. Now obviously these practices are not particularly confirmed, it's just what was described in this one saga, obviously kind of written from the perspective of the Christian king who tried to not outlaw but remove some of these practices. So I don't know how true they actually are, but as King Haakon grew in power and popularity and sort of began to like establish himself, he planned to have the gospel preached just across the country. And according to the saga, the result was that due to his popularity and his growing power, many people allowed themselves to be baptized, and some people stopped making like the sacrifices and rituals that were associated with things like Yule and other pagan practices. Once Haakon believed that he had enough power, he requested that a bishop and various other sort of priests from England come over to Norway and declared that he would have the gospel preached across the country. After that, the rest of the saga is just kind of describing like the reactions of different regional like tribes and groups. Now, the reference to Odin in this particular saga is interesting because scholars have connected a lot of the sort of original celebrations of Yule to something known as the Wild Hunt, which is something that features in folklore across various northern, western and eastern European sort of societies, typically involving a chase led by a mythological figure, usually escorted by like a ghostly or otherwise supernatural group of hunters. In Germanic legends, the leader of the hunt is often a named figure associated with Odin, though a lot of other countries have like other noted historical figures that are associated with sort of their version of it. Interestingly, seeing the Wild Hunt was thought to be an omen of like catastrophe, such as like war or plague, or even the death of the person who witnessed it. In some cases as well, it was believed that the person who witnessed the hunt would then be abducted either to join the underworld or like some other supernatural kingdom. It's very interesting how many different aspects of folklore are associated as being like omens of catastrophe and war, or symbolic of like inevitable death, that kind of thing. I just look really mucky right now. Now, as well as like Odin and the Wild Hunt, there are other aspects of Yule that have become connected or associated with something known as Modranit. It's Old English, which is super hard to say, but it's Old English for Night of the Mothers, or Mother's Night, which was an event held by Anglo-Saxon pagans on what we now know as Christmas Eve. There's not much information about this event that I could find, but it's been suggested that this was another event that involved sort of sacrifices being made, livestock being killed, that kind of thing. And aside from the connections to Yule, it's also been suggested that the event was actually connected to what are known as the Dís, or the Disir, which are basically like female deities or ghosts or spirits from Norse mythology associated with fate. They are fascinating. Again, like I said in my other video, any kind of like powerful female figures in mythology, just, I love them. But as well as the Disir from Norse mythology, it's also believed that there may have been some connection to the Matres and the Matronae of northwestern Europe, and those two words are Latin for mothers and matrons, who again were female deities, and some of the relics for them date back from between like the 1st and 5th century. They are old. You can still see the influence of the sort of original Yule celebrations today, such as things like the Yule log. And no, I don't mean the cake, but the exact origins of this particular tradition are a little bit unclear, but it involved burning a specially selected log, a Yule log, on the hearth as a winter tradition. And again, it's something that's been linked with like solstice celebrations and bonfires. In relation to Christmas, the tradition with the Yule log is that from Christmas Day, you would burn a portion of the log each night until the 12th night, i.e. like January 6th, and the log would be placed under your bed for good luck, as well as protection for the household from things like threats of lightning and, ironically enough, fire. There was actually a certain amount of almost divination involved with the Yule log as well, as it was believed that by counting the sparks that came off the log as it burnt, you would be able to discern like certain aspects of your future and your fortunes for the new year. In some areas as well, it's believed that if you have to relight the Yule log once it's been lit at any point, it was incredibly unlucky, as the point of the Yule log was that it shouldn't go out until the log itself is like burned away. And it was also part of the tradition to sort of sit around the Yule log with no other lights or candles lit, telling ghost stories or playing like card games, things of that sort of nature. So therein lies a very brief history of the Yule celebrations and how they came to be associated with Christmas in what is essentially kind of a parallel to the Irish pagan festival Samhain and what then became Halloween. Now, going back to the Icelandic Yule family of cave-dwelling, children-eating, prank-pulling characters, the Christmas-related folklore for them first appeared around like the 17th century, specifically in relation to the Yule Lads, though the matriarch of the family does actually appear in like much older tales. So the name Grýla is first referred to in medieval sources, although there's no confirmation or sort of explicit detail surrounding her gender, and it was actually believed that it may have been possible Grýla was originally considered a male monster rather than an ogress. But in sort of the 13th century, the name Grýla was then used as like another name for troll women and appeared on like a list of like troll wives. But it wasn't until the 17th century, with the inclusion of like the Yule Lads, that her gender and description and just more information about her character in general was then confirmed. So Grýla is generally represented as this like hideous troll-esque crone or ogress who originally would wander between like human settlements and demand charity from people, specifically asking parents for their disobedient children so that she could throw them in a big sack, take them back to her home, put them in a big pot, cook them, and then eat them. Now, the earliest tales actually have her living in like a small cottage, but she's later like forced out of the town into a remote cave in the Dimmuborgir region. Now, the Dimmuborgir lava fields are actually a real place in Iceland, and basically they're formed of like these volcanic caves and rock formations, and it looks really like eerily similar almost to like ruins or like a collapsed city. And the name itself kind of almost directly translates to that, with Dimmu meaning dark and Borgir meaning cities or forts or castles. It's one of Iceland's most like popular natural tourist attractions, and it has its own very interesting folklore because it's said that it is here that connects the earth with like the infernal regions of hell. And actually in Nordic Christian lore, it is believed that the Dimmuborgir lava fields is the place where Satan himself landed when he was cast out of heaven. Honestly, I had a look at some of the photos of it. It is fascinating. I would love to go there because it looks just so interesting. Because as well, it was actually a shooting location for some of the scenes in Game of Thrones featuring Mance Rayder's wildling camp. And it was also the inspiration behind the name of the Norwegian symphonic black metal band Dimmuborgir. So, fun little factoids for you there. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that Grýla has a husband, but it's believed that, according to folklore, she's actually been married 3 times, but I couldn't really find any information on the previous 2 husbands, because in some cases she was said to have had children from these previous marriages who were, again, just very, very rarely mentioned. But it is her 3rd husband who is often associated with her, and he lives in this cave with her, though doesn't do anything or come out at all. So kind of a deadbeat, to be honest. But again, there is little to no other information on him other than the fact that he's just apparently super lazy. But this lazy 3rd husband is the father to their 13 children, the Yule Lads, who they were like originally portrayed in a much darker tone along with the mother, in that they were like kidnappers of any children who had misbehaved during the Christmas season. And again, it was a story that was used to scare children into behaving, all the way up until 1746, when the King of Denmark objected to their use as like a disciplinary tool, and he actually like officially banned parents from using the tales of the Yule Lads to scare their children. And following on from this, the Yule Lads then sort of developed into much more sort of benevolent, the nicer one. And they sort of transitioned into like the sort of harmless pranksters and like tricksters that are more commonly known today. So the tradition of the Yule Lads is that each one would come down from their cave, like one by one each night, during the 13 nights, either leading up to Christmas or following Christmas. I saw a few different sources on like the exact dates, but the general sort of accepted dateline is that they come down to town one by one in the 12 or 13 days leading up to Christmas, and then they leave one by one in the 13 days that follow Christmas, if that makes sense. Other than some disparity on the dates though, most of the general information that I found about their kind of like story and tradition was the same. So in preparation for the Yule Lads' visit each night, children would place a shoe or a pair of shoes on their windowsill, and if they had been deemed good enough, the Yule Lad would leave them some kind of present, usually sort of sweets and candy and nuts, that kind of thing. But if the child had misbehaved, they would instead wake up on Christmas morning to find a rotting potato in their shoe. In a way that's like weirdly similar to sort of Snow White and the 7 Dwarves, each of the Yule Lads has their own very distinct and very literal name, which are a reflection of their personality and the particular pranks that they like to pull. Now, there were actually dozens of different names that have appeared through various tales and stories relating to the Yule Lads, and it actually wasn't until 1932 when a poem was published that became super popular about the Yule Lads that established what is now considered like their canon names and personalities, as well as actually confirming the number of Yule Lads, because there, again, I saw various different sources that stated in some tales there was only 9 of them, in other tales there was like 10, but there was also 2 female Yule Lads, Ladettes. But I have to say, the names of the Yule Lads are just unintentionally hilarious because they are so very, very literal. So I will go through them and see if you can guess what each one does based on their name. Now, I will preface this by saying I'm going to give the English translation of the names, but I will put the Icelandic version here because there is no chance that I can pronounce all of the original Icelandic names because there's so many letters. So the first Yule Lad, who arrives on December 12th and leaves on December 25th, is Sheepcoat Clod, and his prank is to harass sheep. Although he is impaired by the fact that he has 2 very stiff peg legs. Second up is Gully Gork, who hides in gullies, but he in particular waits for opportunities to sneak into the cowshed and steal the froth off the top of milk. Thirdly, we have Stubby, who is described as abnormally short, but he in particular has a taste for all the food that's baked into the bottom of pans, so he will then come along and steal said pans. The next 3 work together as a nice little trio, because we have Spoon Licker, who licks spoons, but specifically wooden cooking spoons, and as a result he's described as being extremely thin due to malnutrition because he doesn't actually eat anything, he just licks spoons. Coming in 5th, we have Pot Scraper, who is kind of similar to Stubby in that he scrapes the food off the bottom of pans and any food that's baked into the bottom of stuff. That's his thing, but he's his normal height, I guess. And then 6th is Bowl Licker, who he hides under beds waiting for wooden food bowls that were placed on the floor. I don't know too much about the food bowl being placed on the floor. I saw somewhere that that's an old tradition as well. Maybe it's an old version of a midnight snack or something. But the 7th Yule Lad is Door Slammer, who likes to slam doors, but particularly in the middle of the night in order to try and wake everyone up. Then 8th is known as Skyr Gobbler, who just really, really likes the regional Icelandic yogurt Skyr. Is that what you pronounce Skyr? I'm very sorry. In 9th place, we have Sausage Swiper. In 9th place, we have Sausage Swiper, who he specifically hides in the rafters to try and steal sausages as they're being hung up to be smoked, basically. The 10th Yule Lad is Window Peeper, who is essentially just a burglar because he just peers in windows to look for things to steal. Then the 11th lad is Doorway Sniffer, described as having an abnormally large nose and a very acute sense of smell that he uses in order to try and locate and sniff out baked goods, specifically something known as leaf bread, which is, again, it's a baked good, very common in Iceland, usually and almost exclusively served around Christmas. Then number 12, you have Meat Hook, who uses a hook to steal meat. That's about as much information I could get on that one. And the 13th and final Yule Lad, who arrives on Christmas Eve and leaves on January 6th, is Candle Beggar, who would follow children round and try to steal their precious candles that were usually made of tallow, because tallow is essentially just animal fat, so therefore they were edible for him, because at that time most candles were made out of animal fat, beef dripping, that kind of thing, because wax was insanely expensive, so only the very, very elite and rich people had wax candles. Now, whilst the Yule Lads have become known as these almost Santa-esque figures who bring gifts to well-behaved children alongside their sort of minor harmless prankster ways, there is the final member of their family who is not quite so light-hearted, which is the monstrous and vicious Yule Cat. Now, whilst Grýla and her 13 sons are often used as cautionary tales for children, the Yule Cat makes no such exceptions, and as such, both adult and child alike are at risk. The Icelandic name for the Yule Cat is incredibly complicated to pronounce. Please bear with me. Jólakaturin, And it was first mentioned in 1862 as part of a collection of like folklore tales. It was described as this evil beast known for prowling through the snowy countrysides, either eating people who didn't receive new clothes for Christmas, or in other versions, eating their Christmas bit, which was basically an extra portion of food that was given to the residents of a farm. So slight variations in the story, because it would either eat your food, or it would eat you. Now, whilst the Yule Cat was associated with Christmas sort of from the get-go, it wasn't until that particular 1932 collection of poetry that named the 13 Yule Lads that the cat, or the Yule Cat, became like established as part of Icelandic Christmas folklore. Because one of the poems, named Jólabókaflóð, centred on this man-eating monster, which subsequently then became a very common part of Christmas festivities as well as decorations. Now, originally the poem didn't associate the Yule Cat with Grýla or her sons, but because they were all featured within the same collection of poetry, it led to connections between them in later stories, and by sort of the middle of the 20th century, the Yule Cat was considered to be the pet of Grýla and the Yule Lads. There's actually some later stories that state that the Yule Cat is actually so disobedient that it's only Stubby, who is the smallest of the Yule Lads, who's able to like direct the cat, because he's able to ride on the cat's back across the countryside. Now, because the Yule Cat was only first mentioned in 1862, the origins of the actual story are a bit unclear, but there are two leading theories about it. One theory has connected the Yule Cat to various other entities that were said to have accompanied St. Nicholas in other European traditions. However, the generally more accepted theory is in relation to the 1862 publication itself, as the author, Jón Arnarsson, left a footnote which used the figure of speech to dress the cat. I tried to find out what that figure of speech meant, because the only thing I could see was in relation to this story. I still don't entirely know what it means. From what I could tell, it's generally used like it's when you say something but you're implying something else, or what you're saying means something else. I don't know, it was a bit unclear. But if you know what to dress the cat means, or can you give me an example of how it's used in a sentence? Because I really couldn't wrap my head around it. But anyway, based on the footnote and the lack of kind of any other written sources about the Yule Cat prior to his writings, it's believed by some that this figure of speech, this phrase, was the source that inspired the tale of the Yule Cat, specifically with regards to the cat's association with clothing. Now, speaking of clothes, the Yule Cat was originally and sort of traditionally used as either a threat or an incentive, depending on how you looked at it, for farm workers to finish processing all the wool that had been collected in the autumn before Christmas, because those who took part in the work were rewarded with new clothing, but those who didn't were given nothing and thus became prey for the Yule Cat. As such, the traditions and legend surrounding the Yule Cat became a way of incentivizing people to try and work hard, as well as encouraging people to give the gift of warm clothing at Christmas, which is partly why it's become part of Icelandic tradition at Christmas to give and receive new clothes. Even something as simple as a pair of socks would save you from the Yule Cat. Now, whilst it's not specifically related to the cave-dwelling family of children eaters and their monstrous cat, there is one other Icelandic Christmas tradition that I really wanted to talk about because I absolutely love it. And it's what is known as, bear with me, Jólabókaflóð, or the Yule Book Flood. I'm sure some people will have heard of this, or at least heard of the traditions associated with it. I knew of it beforehand, I could never remember what it was called. But essentially, the name refers to the annual release of new books that occur in the months leading up to Christmas. And these books are then purchased as presents and given as gifts on Christmas Eve. This tradition has actually made books the most popular Christmas gift in the country, and the tradition generally continues beyond just giving the books. Many Icelandic people will often sit together and read their new books on Christmas Eve together whilst drinking hot chocolate and just generally having a very wholesome, cozy little evening. The newly published books are actually listed in like an annual catalogue that is called the Journal of Books, and it's distributed to all households for free. The release of this journal generally marks the beginning of the book flood and sort of signals the start of the holiday season. Maybe similar to over here, how people associate like the John Lewis Christmas advert and the Coca-Cola truck as being like, people always say that's when you know it's Christmas, when you see those two things. So these particular traditions come from Iceland's like centuries-long literary history, but mainly as a result of the state of the economy after World War II, because there was really strict like currency restrictions that limited the amount of imported giftware that you could have. But because the restrictions on imported paper were much more lenient than on other products, books became the gift of choice for Christmas and remain that way to this day. I've always been quite a big reader and I love sitting down and curling up with a good book. So the idea of everyone sitting around on Christmas Eve, giving each other a book, and then you all just sit there and read together, it's just, I love that idea so much. Okay, so I'm about there with this makeup look. I just need to go and do the last little bits. So I'm gonna go do that and then we can come back and finish up. I definitely DIY'd the hair a little bit, which is why it's ropey as hell. I'm really happy with how this came together. It feels like a very complete character. So I was trying to think of what look I wanted to do for this video because I thought, I could try and turn myself into a Yule Lad or what. So I took more of like a loose inspiration from it, and basically I just wanted an excuse to kind of create a troll-esque, ogre-y type of creature, but slightly more nice fairy tale vibe than child eating. But yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's really hard to try and balance this hood on my head with the ears and the wig right now, so I'm going to try and stop moving so much. So brings us to the end of the tale of the Yule Lads and their mother and their cat. It was interesting researching this because whilst I'd heard of the Christmas Eve book tradition, Jólabókaflóð, I'd never come across anything related to Grýla or the Yule Lads or even the Yule Cat. But I know a few people had obviously suggested it to me, but interestingly enough, I also didn't realise the film Red One, which is literally just come out at the cinema. It's the new Dwayne Johnson Christmas action film. It actually features the character of Grýla as the main bad guy. Although in this film, she's not a child-eating ogress. Instead, she is a beautiful young woman, more akin to a witch who kidnaps Santa Claus and wants to trap all of the naughty children in these snow globe things. I read into that a little bit and I was a bit it's not. If they've taken some definite creative liberties with the character design there, but they've apparently excused her youthful appearance in that she is actually an ogress, but she has the ability to shapeshift, specifically into something that makes the film a lot more kid-friendly, which I can kind of understand. But yeah, if you are from Iceland or you've ever experienced Christmas in Iceland, please let me know what your experience was like. I would really like to spend Christmas in Iceland because obviously you're almost always guaranteed to have snow, you've got the Northern Lights that often make an appearance, and you've got all these really fascinating, really interesting traditions. I know in Reykjavik there's a big statue or a big lit up decoration thing of the Yule Cat that's in the town centre. I don't know if it's still there or if that was a one-off, but between that and the Christmas Eve thing, I feel like Christmas in Iceland is just a very unique, very magical time. But yes, let me know what you think of the traditions and the stories. Which Yule Lad is your favourite? I think mine has to be Sausage Swiper, but let me know what you think of the look as well. Like I said, I know it's very, very loosely based on elements of the story rather than direct characters, but let me know as well what other stories and myths, legends, creatures you want me to cover in the future. Also, shameless self-promo for a moment, please don't forget to like, subscribe, notification bell, blah blah blah, all that stuff, just so that you don't miss any of these videos or any updates to do with these videos, that kind of thing. I will be looking to start varying a bit of the content that I upload. In near, I will still be continuing with this series. But yeah, make sure you are subscribed with a notification bell on so that you are kept up to date with that kind of stuff. But other than that, I hope you all have a fabulous day. I love and appreciate all of you very, very much. And other than that, I will see you all in the next one. Bye. Why is the white balance going off on my camera so much? Traitor.